Hey everyone, so now that we're coming into hurricane season here in the Northeast, I want to talk about what I do for generator maintenance as well as storm prep. So about once a month or so, I come out here just to do a sort of visual maintenance, to check on the generator, make sure everything's good, check the oil, just, real simple inspection that I like to do periodically, because you never really know when this thing is going to be running, especially for an extended period of time. So first thing I do is I usually like to just do a good visual inspection, walk around the generator, look for any damage, whether it's from animals, debris, even possibly vandalism. I want to make sure that there's no issues, problems, or anything wrong with the generator that I didn't notice last time. I also want to do a good visual inspection of the actual plumbing for the generator itself. This top line here is a natural gas line. On the back, it has a rubber connector that goes into the generator. These two lower conduits, this larger one is power into the house. The lower one is power that goes into the generator to charge the batteries and run the systems on it. So I want to make sure those are good. No animals chewed them. They didn't get damaged from any sort of debris or something falling on them. I also want to exercise the emergency shutoff valves that I have. One here, I also have one closer to the meter. So if I need to shut the generator off in an emergency, I can with no issue. Another really important thing that a lot of people forget with these things is you want to leave an air gap, a nice big air gap around these generators. You want to check your owner's manual to see what it specifically recommends for your generator. Now, the biggest factor about how much gap has to be around your generator is going to be the materials made out of. If you have something that's metal, either steel or aluminum, since they don't burn, your tolerances are much closer. So things like siding, plants can be much closer. You can tuck these much closer to the house. If you see a generator and it's tucked way far away from the house, typically that's because it's made of composite or basically plastic. So typically those have to be much further away from the house, since plastic has the potential to catch on fire and burn. So every once in a while, I'll come out here with my hedge trimmer. I'll make sure that the bushes aren't getting too close to the generator. They have a nice air gap around them. This thing doesn't get really hot when it's running, but it gets pretty warm after it's been running for an extended period of time, especially when it's under load, when it's actually not doing something like a systems check or a function, but it's actually running to power the house. So after I do my good, thorough visual inspection, then I want to open it up and make sure everything looks good on the inside. So I'll take my key out, make sure you lock these things, don't leave them unlocked. There's always the potential for vandalism or something to happen. So just make sure they're always locked up. Fortunately, these Kohlers come apart very easily with no tools. The sides pop off, no tools. These have vents on the side. This is the exhaust side. Obviously, the intake's the other way. This has wire mesh on the back to help keep animals from getting in. It's pretty small, so it'll keep a lot of the rodents from getting in. But the bugs can still get in, so there's a potential for bug nests in here, bees nests. So you want to make sure that you're checking it periodically for that. And then it just has a couple of clips on the other side. This is pretty well insulated, so this generator is actually very quiet when it's running, when the housing's completely on. So that's actually pretty nice. Just a very, very low hum I can hear in the house when this thing is running. All right, so opened up. Same thing I did outside, I want to do inside. Good visual inspection. I want to make sure there's no things like oil leaks. I want to make sure there's no animal nests, bees nests, anything in here that basically shouldn't be. It didn't get dirty, it didn't get mulch or leaves or dirt or anything here. I usually get a little bit just from cutting the lawn. Sometimes a little bit of mulch makes it in the very bottom here. It's really not a big deal. I just want to make sure it's not going to interfere with anything. Same thing with the visual inspection. I want to look for anything that's susceptible to becoming damaged. I want to make sure all the rubber components, everything from the hoses to the vibration dampeners, all those rubber components are good. They're not cracked, dry rotted, or damaged. I want to make sure all the electrical lines, nothing's rubbing against itself, creating an issue where it could create a short or cause some sort of damage to the system. So same thing, good visual inspection. There's no cracks in the exhaust system. Your owner's manual should go into a lot of detail about what to look at to give you sort of a reference point, but I try to be as thorough as possible, since this is kind of my last line of defense for keeping the house powered, especially in the event of a big storm or a major power outage. I'll check, make sure the battery's good. I'll check the battery terminals, make sure there's no corrosion, everything looks good. Your manufacturer might have a different recommendation for battery replacement. I'd probably recommend about every 5 years, or at least get it checked if you have the capabilities to check the battery, make sure it's still good. This is essentially a car battery, so it's pretty easy to get a replacement battery for this thing. You don't necessarily have to go with the manufacturer's one, but this is just a general car battery grouping size. I'll check the back, make sure the regulator looks good. For the natural gas, no animals have gotten in there. None of the wires have gotten rubbed or damaged or anything like that. There's no debris buildup. I don't see any cracks in any of the hosing and the hoses. So everything looks really good. I don't see any surprises. I don't see anything out of place on here. So whenever I want to get into actually getting into the generator itself, it's a good idea to turn it off on the off chance this thing tries to start up unexpectedly when you're doing any sort of maintenance on it. So on the control panel here, it has 3 main buttons on it. It has an off, an automatic, and a run. Off, obviously, I'll hit right now. I'm going to turn it off. Generator will not start even in automatic mode anymore. So I'm going to get a notification on my phone in about a minute saying that the generator's been turned off. Automatic is what I normally leave it on, where it will come on and off by itself. And then run if you want to do a manual run. And this has a connector on here for maintenance reasons, or if I had repairs done, a professional can plug into it and see what's going on. The nice thing about this generator is this is online with Kohler's system. If there is a problem, they can see it from their end. I will also get the notifications to my phone. So that's a really nice thing, having this thing online. And then through the Kohler app, I can start this thing, stop this thing, check it, and get notifications on my phone. So if I'm at work one day, power goes out, within about a minute, it sends me a notification, power has been lost, the generator's running. And I can look at the parameters of the generator, the power output, the engine speed, the engine temperature, things like that. So I can kind of monitor it when it is running. And then you have a couple more buttons on the side here, basically an up and down button for going through the different menus, clearing maintenance codes, checking the information setting, things like the time, basically stuff like that. Just a really simple controller. So the generator right now is turned off. It will not fire. This is a lot of people get intimidated by these things. This is a very, very simple engine. This is essentially a 1-liter V-twin engine. This is the same type of engine that is used on things like zero-turn mowers, except this is a horizontal shaft instead of a vertical shaft like a lawnmower might be. So this is actually a very simple engine. It's air-cooled. That means it doesn't have engine coolant. There's no radiators on this thing. So this is actually a pretty simple setup overall. The main maintenance items on this thing are going to be the engine oil and filter. That's something that has to be changed periodically. For this, it's every about 100 hours or so, or once a year they recommend. So it has a dipstick on the back here. This thing only takes 2 quarts of oil, so it doesn't need a lot. You have an oil filter here on the top. Now, the oil filter does sit up and down, but the oil will drain back out of it. So if you ever do an oil change, you'll usually let it run, let everything warm up, let it sit for a little while. The oil will run out of it. So it looks like it's going to make a mess when you do an oil change, but it doesn't. And then you have obviously a spark plug, one on each side. And then on top here, you have an air filter. This is something I also like to do. Now the intake comes in through the side and then comes into the filter. So there is a possibility that bugs could try to make a home in this air filter, because I'm sure after this thing runs, it gets nice and warm in here. So especially in the winter, they might try to make a home in here. So this is a good idea to pop this thing off periodically and take a look. So here's the air filter on the top. Comes off nice and easily, no debris, a little bit of dust on here, no big deal. But filter looks really good. So nothing's in there that's not supposed to be. So that's pretty much what I do for my monthly maintenance. Especially I want to check the oil. Sometimes I do that a little bit more if I know the generator's been running. Most of these will have pre-programmed into them some sort of maintenance schedule where they will basically come on. Mine comes on once a week for 15 minutes just to help keep it lubricated and exercised. That's something that's a good idea to do. Basically just keep everything moving. You don't want to let this thing just sit stagnant potentially for maybe, who knows how long, maybe a year. If you go a year without having a power outage and this thing has sat and hasn't run at all, that's really not good to have engines not run at all. You're usually doing more harm than good by not running them whatsoever. So that 15 minutes every week, that's only a few hours a year. It's really not a lot. So I know that it stays lubricated. I know it stays good. And if there's potentially a problem, I'm going to know. If it tries to start and fails and something happens, it's going to send me a notification that something went wrong when it tried to do its weekly exercise. So I can get on top of that immediately and know if there is any sort of problem. Because the last thing you want to do is find out right when a storm is about to hit that there's a problem with your generator. So let me put this thing back together, and then I want to also talk about something that a lot of people forget to do, and that is storm prep. Getting ready, you're watching the news, that big storm's coming, and you could potentially be without power for a long period of time. There's some things that manufacturers recommend that you really want to check before that big storm hits. All right, so now that I did the periodic inspection that should be done with this generator, now I want to talk about storm prep. This is something that most people don't realize should be done in the event that a major storm or hurricane is potentially coming. The main thing with storm prep is you want to put actual load on the generator, because this generator could potentially be running days or even weeks. If you go through a major storm, like here in the Northeast, we went through Hurricane Sandy, you have people without power for weeks or even some people without power for over a month. Last you want to find out is that the generator is experiencing an issue under actual load. That periodic weekly cycle that you do to keep everything lubricated, keep the oil moving around, keep the seals conditioned in the engine is good. keeps everything with the engine good, but it doesn't put actual load on the system. Think about that. It's basically the same as idling your car in your driveway. You go to put it in gear, and now that the engine's actual under load, there could potentially be an issue when you actually put load on it. I did a video on this actually where I actually pulled the generator off of utility power manually, and I basically tricked the system into thinking that it lost power, which essentially it did, and it ran the generator and it powered the house. That's putting actual load on the generator. I will take that video and I will link it above. I'll also put it at the end of this video as well. Essentially what I did was I flipped the breaker on the automatic transfer switch, and that cut power from the utility to the transfer switch. The transfer switch then realized power was lost. It then started the process to fire up the generator as it normally would, say even during a weekly cycle. But the difference was now this wasn't just going through essentially an idle period. This is actually putting load on the generator. It then had to run all the systems that were running into the house. So now I knew the generator was working not only under an idle condition, but under actual load. Because like I said, you get a major hurricane, a major storm, you're without power for a long period of time. The last thing you want to do is find out, yeah, this thing's running fine during its weekly cycle, but now that I have potentially a lot of load on the generator, maybe there's an issue. And trying to get someone out from a service company to fix one of these in the middle of a storm is going to be a nightmare. They're probably going to be so busy and so booked out, you're in trouble. So you want to be on top of this. You want to make sure as far out from a storm as possible, even if you don't have a storm coming. I usually do it like once a year just to put the generator on actual load, or if it's been a long time since I've lost power in the house, I'll turn a bunch of things on in the house, put some serious load on this thing, make sure this thing is okay to go in the event that we have a major power outage for a long period of time. Now, getting into additional things about power being out for a long period of time, you want to make sure you have plenty of extra parts and resources available for the generator. These things are not complex. There's really not a lot of maintenance parts to them. Like I said, mainly just your air filter, your spark plugs, and then you're doing oil changes. The minimum thing you should have in stock, ready to go, is going to be engine oil. This engine only has about 2 quarts of oil in it. Now, Kohler's recommendation, yours may vary depending on your generator, is every 8 hours of actual load on this generator, shut it down manually and check the oil. You don't want to end up running these things low on oil because these are air-cooled. So you can potentially burn these generators up if they're running extended periods of time on low oil. So I always make sure I have a significant amount of engine oil in stock. So if we get hit with that storm and this thing's running for weeks, I'm ready to go. I got plenty of oil if it's burning a little bit or something happens, or even if it's running so much to the point where I need to do an oil change. I usually also keep an extra oil filter in stock. So I don't need to worry about running out to somewhere and trying to locate something in the middle of a storm to do some sort of maintenance on this thing. Everything's in stock and it's ready to go. The oil and the oil filter are probably at least a minimum. And getting into the oil itself, now I'm not endorsing a certain brand, but most of these manufacturers, especially with these air-cooled generators, are going to recommend that you run a small engine oil. There's a whole lot of manufacturers that run a small engine oil. This is different from the car oil. What is different about small engine oils, they are an older standard which uses higher levels of zinc and phosphorus in the oil. These are excellent anti-wear additives. You can't run these in cars because the emissions, the catalytic converters in the cars will get damaged by those high levels of zinc and phosphorus. But for engines like this that don't have catalytic converters on them, this is a much better oil. If you're in an emergency, you have nothing left, you need to run a car oil, it will work. You will be okay, but it won't afford as much protection as a small engine oil would. You always want to make sure you run the small engine oil. It's going to have on the back the different API service levels, and your owner's manual will give you a recommendation of what type of oil to run, but most of the time it's going to be some sort of small engine oil. And I always make sure I have plenty of this in stock and ready to go because I use this in all my other small equipment as well. This stuff is actually really good. So I hope that kind of helped everybody just for general maintenance and storm prep for your generator. First thing you should do when you get a generator is make sure you read the owner's manual, at least go over at least the maintenance schedule, so you kind of have a mental picture of what needs to be checked, what needs to be done, and how often it needs to be done, so you kind of can roughly gauge when you need to do things. And most of these newer ones are going to give you notifications. They're going to have timers on them that will send you notifications to your phone. I got one at 150 hours or so of time on it that it was time to do some maintenance on. So I just went through the maintenance guide, checked, everything was good. I cleared it out on the control panel, and everything was good to go after that. So if there's anything else you'd like to see on the generator, more information about it, just let me know in the comments. I'll try to oblige everybody, but I hope this helped everybody so that if you have one of these home standby generators, you're ready for your next major power outage. So hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.